I am so delighted to be here with you, Clint Smith III, someone who has the pulse of the moment, but who I have the pleasure of knowing for a while. And let me, if you don't mind, say a little bit for our audience. You're a staff writer at The Atlantic and the author of the poetry collection, Counting Descent. You've been a poet, an academic, a great father, a friend, a mentor, and someone who helps us all find the comfort in uncomfortable conversations that we need to have. So welcome. This is the sign language applause. I'm so glad that you're here.
Thank you so much. It's so good to be here with you.
This is a time of examination at the organization level, as well as in the documentary field. But I love the title of our event, which is 2021 Empowering Truth. It's celebrating our past, our present, and our future. And we need all of our folks to move forward. So let's get right into this. Clint, books, much like film, take time to come to life. And I'm curious how your inspiration came about for How the Word is Passed, a reckoning with the history of slavery across America. This isn't a pledge drive, but I will say you should have this book. How did it come about?
Yeah, I appreciate the plug. So the book began in May of 2017 when I was watching several Confederate statues come down in my hometown in New Orleans. So statues to PGT Beauregard, Jefferson Davis, Robert E. Lee, these leaders of the Confederacy. And I was watching these statues come down and thinking about what it meant that I grew up in a majority Black city in which there were more homages to enslavers than there were to enslaved people. And so part of what I was thinking about was like, how is New Orleans telling the story about its own relationship to this history through its institutions, through its landscape? And then I sort of broadened it out to think about, well, how are different parts of this country and even different places across the ocean, how are they talking about this history? And what can our institutions, the museums and memorials and plantations and prisons and homes and all of these different historic sites, what do they have to tell us about what we are saying or failing to say about our country's relationship to this history of slavery and how it continues to shape the landscape of inequality today?
Throughout the book, there is a through line of people who had different encounters with the history through education, through what they heard from their family, through shame of Africa, of the whole continent, through thinking this happened and then that happened. And you do a beautiful job, better than I am here, of talking about storytelling and how it gets really disconnected. And there's a way that you speak about the people who are descendants of the families who once lived in the places that you visit. You beautifully explained how important it was to be in that place. Place matters. You call them public historians who carry with them a piece of the country's collective memory. And one of the things that we've explored throughout our year of reflection and looking at how we tell stories is a question of who gets to tell what stories. So what do we stand to gain when stories of communities of color are told by those communities, or when stories are told by with authentic first person voice? What can we gain from that?
I mean, we gain an honest picture of how this society came to be what it is. So the first place that I go in the book is Monticello. And so Monticello is fascinating to me because it is a place where, it is the home of Thomas Jefferson, the third president of the United States, one of our founding fathers. And I think that Jefferson in many ways personifies the story of America, and in the sense that America is a place that has provided unparalleled, unimaginable opportunities for millions of people across generations in ways that their ancestors could have never imagined. It has also done so at the direct expense of millions and millions of other people who have been intergenerationally subjugated and oppressed. And both of those things are the story of America. We have to hold both of those realities at once. And Jefferson is similarly someone who wrote in one document that all men are created equal, and wrote in another document that Black people are inferior to whites in both endowments of body and mind. He wrote one of the most important documents in the history of the Western world, and also enslaved over 600 people over the course of his lifetime, including 4 of his own children. And so we have to hold all of that together when we understand who Jefferson was. And I think that it embodies how we have to hold all of these sort of complicated elements together when we think about what this country is. And so much of what the story we are told about this country is sort of is singular and unidirectional, and this sort of inevitable climb toward progress, or that it was founded by these people with ideals who were, uncompromised ideals, and people who represented the best. We constantly invoke them as the best of what America has ever known and ever had, and we don't hold the entire truth, the entire sort of nature of the truth of who they were and what they believed, and subsequently, in sort of uncomplicating our past, we create a sort of myopic understanding of why the world and why our society looks the way that it does now. And what Monticello is attempting to do now, because they are invested in the project of attempting to tell a fuller story, is collecting oral histories from descendants of people who were enslaved at Monticello in what's called the Getting Word Oral History Project. And those stories and those narratives, those oral histories that have been passed down, are now informing the curatorial process at Monticello, so that Monticello can tell a fuller and more honest story about itself. And I think that is sort of emblematic of what we need to continue to do across this country, is say, what stories have we not heard? And how can those stories give us a better sense of why our country looks the way that it does, so that we understand that the reason one community looks one way and another community looks another way is not simply because of the people in those communities or personal decisions that they've made, but it is a reflection of things that have been done to those communities generation after generation after generation.
And there's a word that has gained a lot of traction over the past year and a half. It's unlearning, and I'm thinking about the world, how we're all unlearning some things, learning new things, finding our space and trying to co-curate a better place for all of us. At least that's my intention and the people that I work with. The spirit of this word can be found in your book as you call upon readers to revisit the histories that have been instilled in us, and what they bring about. And again, I think for some of us, it is genetic trauma, genetic guilt. We're all touched by our past. We all suffer from the past of this country. And so what does unlearning mean to you? And what does it look like as we move to tell? We still want to be creative. We still want people to tell stories. How do we find more authentic stories to tell and more factual stories and histories?
Yeah, I think we've kind of alluded to it a little bit, but part of unlearning is also, it sounds like you're retracting something, but in many ways, unlearning is the expansion of something, right? It is telling more stories, not fewer. It is telling a wider array of stories. It is saying who are the stories and who are the people and what are the narratives that we have sidelined or erased or not even considered at all. And what can those tell us about this country? What can those tell us about ourselves? And we think about this in the context of race, but I think this is the case in the context of all sorts of things. I mean, so much of my own unlearning with regard to a host of issues. I mean, I think about immigration. I think about LGBTQ issues. I think about gender. I think about just a range of things in which I was born into a world that inundated me with messages not only around white supremacy, but also patriarchy and sexism and xenophobia, and unlearning so much of that is about taking what we have consumed, whether we did it consciously or unconsciously, and sort of extracting that from us. But I'd argue that the best way to extract those harmful sensibilities from our consciousness is to consume stories that trouble and complicate and expand those narratives. I mean, it is the novels that I have read that have expanded my understanding of like what it means to be an immigrant, what it means to be a refugee, what it means to leave your home. It is the documentaries that I've watched that have expanded my sense of the struggles of the LGBTQ community over the course of generations. It is the plays that I've seen that have given me a better sense of the way that sexism and patriarchy have, continued to be omnipresent forces, violent forces for generations and for centuries. And I think art like has this remarkable and powerful opportunity to insert itself into our consciousness and to say, there's a new way to think about this that you might not have thought about before. And it is those pieces of art that I think make us fuller people because they give us a fuller sense of the world.
And so I just want to share, I was reading your book at the same time I was reading another one, America's Racial Karma, a book about healing by Larry Ward. And it seems like this time of self-reflection and awareness is embraced by some and causes so much denial, fear, and fragility for others. Do you see this trend of awareness continuing, of self-discovery continuing? Where do you hope that it will take us? And perhaps what work is there still to be done on addressing the topic of storytelling?
I do feel like we are moving. I was going to say trending, but trending sounds too passive. I think we are moving because that denotes something active, like you have to pick up your feet or move in a certain direction. I think we are moving in a direction in which, people are recognizing that there are so many voices that have not been included in our media, in our entertainment, in our arts, in our culture. And I don't think it's a coincidence that there has been a shift in our public consciousness around so many issues. Me Too, Black Lives Matter, even before that, Occupy, and the way we think about class and class structures. The art and culture are in this sort of relationship with what we see happening politically, and what we see happening socially. And they very much contribute to people having a more acute and expanded sense of again, like why our society looks the way that it does. Because at the end of the day, like that's what this is about, right? It is creating stories that help us look around and say, I understand why this looks like that now, or I better understand why this place has this and that place doesn't, or it's interesting, or like how bad is it that I was told that these people have this or don't have that because of something they have done, rather than because of things that have been taken from them or not given to them in the first place. I mean, I think, part of it is, I think about the way people invoke Chicago, right? And use it as a sort of proxy for a desire to talk about all the things that are wrong with Black people and violence and poverty and Democrats, all of it, and how unnuanced it often is and how uncomplicated. And I think that you have more people who are rejecting that sort of framing and that sort of fear mongering in ways that may have been effective 10, 20 years ago, that I think are less effective now, because more people understand the systemic and structural way in which certain communities and groups of people have been prevented from having access to the story that America has told about itself. And again, so one of the things that one of the quotes that I love the most is from Alfred Lord Tennyson's poem Ulysses. And what he says in one of the lines of this poem is, I am a part of all that I have met. And I think about how we are like an amalgamation of the experiences we've had, the people we've spoken to and met, and the art and culture that we've consumed. And those things shape how we move through the world. Again, like I have been chained. I think of the first poem, one of the first poems I ever heard read out loud was by a woman who had cerebral palsy. Uh, and she got on stage and she did this poem about living with this condition. And in 3 minutes, the way I thought about an entire demographic of people had completely changed. I left that room never thinking about disability the same way again. Just because someone had shared their story and did it in a compelling, beautiful, profound, moving way. And disability was never something that was at the forefront of my consciousness. And immediately after that, it became embedded in my sense of the world. I looked at the world through a fundamentally different lens than I had before. And I think that's what stories can do. And we all have examples of the ways that has happened in our own lives.
Yeah.
And I think that, we're all better off for that.
Well, we're better off for our conversation with you. We're looking forward to 55 additional years of storytelling, perhaps speaking with you again with a future book. And I encourage all of you to check out this book. And it's How the World is Past, Clint Smith, third. We can let you know how to find it. Your number one responsibility is to educate yourself. And then you can base your actions and your choices on facts. So let's keep doing that with great documentaries and great books. Thank you, Clint, so much for being with us. And thanks to everyone who's watched.